Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Right, hopefully you're seeing the presentation now. Yep, so good afternoon, everyone. It's a sunny Friday afternoon down in Kent. So yes, welcome to this Adult Safeguarding and Faculty Code of Ethics webinar. So the presenters for the session today will be myself, Dave Rogers, who's the Deputy Registrar for the Faculty of Occupational Hygiene, and Sarah Mason, who's one of the FAM committee members. So delighted actually with this webinar because it's the first joint FO and FAM webinar which is being hosted. So I'm hoping it won't be the last, but yeah, quite excited to be involved with this one this afternoon. This webinar is mandatory for all FO and FAM faculty members. The reason being for that is that the guidelines are an update to the Faculty Code of Ethics, which all of you need to follow. So Lee will be explaining and how links will be sent out via email for those of you who can't attend the webinar. Obviously, it's no point explaining that because you're all on the webinar. And attendance will count towards CPD points. So the next thing we're going to be doing is I will actually stop sharing after doing that intro and just hand back to Lee, because we have got 3 questions for you all just to set the scene, to see what your sort of understanding of adult safeguarding is at the moment. So over to you for a minute, Lee.
Excellent. So I'm just going to share my screen here. That'll work. There we go. So some of you may have used this piece of software before, just a polling software called VVox that we've used at some of the conferences. So if everyone's got their phone next to them or near them or can grab it quite quickly, if you just go to this website here on the left, vvox.app, and then enter this 9-digit code, it should bring you up a question. And it's a simple yes or no question. You can hopefully see it on the screen there. Oh, 18 of you are already in it, so that was very quick. So it's a quick yes or no. I will leave it 15-20 seconds just to get some answers in. It's just to get an idea of everybody's knowledge kind of coming into the webinar. And then just as a warning, at the end of the presentation, we're going to do something very similar. So it'll be a different 9-digit code, and we'll see hopefully those numbers have swung one way to the other. So there you go. Everyone's been very, very quick. I'll just give it another 5-10 seconds. So I'll close that one off and get the answers there. So there you go. As you can see, people, this is what we're thinking, that there'd be more less aware than are, and then hopefully by the end of this, that will flip the other way. So we've just got the next question for you here. You know that, like I say, they're all simple yes and no's. Oh, I will close that one off as well. I think that's near everybody. Okay, that's good to see. And I will swiftly move on to the final question. Those numbers are shooting right up. That's good to see. And I'll close that one off there. There you go, the majority having had to consider safeguarding principles. So thank you for that so far. So I will just stop sharing my screen there and pass you back over to Sarah to continue the webinar. Like I say, keep your phones handy. We'll be doing another closing VVox poll at the end of the presentations.
Right, thank you, Lee. And so pleased to see that a lot of you do feel you're already aware of some of the safeguarding principles, and also have had scenarios where you've used it. So we may be asking all of you some questions later on. But as Lee said, if you want to put any questions in the chat box, please do, and Lee will be monitoring that as we progress through the webinar. And after myself, Dave, and the other Sarah have spoken, there will be an open sort of Q&A session there. So lots of opportunities, hopefully. And if anyone's got any advice or tips they'd like to share with the group, that would be a good opportunity as well. They were the questions. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so adult safeguarding and the faculty code of ethics. So hopefully all of you are familiar with the code of ethics. There is one code of ethics which covers both FO and FAM, and the latest version of that document is May 2023, when it was updated to include this Appendix A, occupational hygiene and adult safeguarding. So some of you may be wondering why we felt we needed to include guidelines for adult safeguarding into the Code of Ethics. Well, the main driver for this is the need arose during the preparation, which took place over the last couple of years, for the PSA accreditation of the Register of Occupational Hygiene Professionals. So safeguarding measures are considered during the PS application of all potential registers. So it's not something specifically they were asking BOHS about. It's a question they look for any society which is looking for accreditation of its register. And that then prompted us to, for the faculties to develop this appendix to the Code of Ethics. So hopefully during this webinar, it'll increase your understanding of the principles of safeguarding. We want to make sure that all FO and FAM faculty members have the confidence to identify scenarios where safeguarding may be required and have the knowledge to protect yourselves. The need for safeguarding may not be that obvious for all of us. We don't deal all the time or as much with members of the public, and we certainly don't typically provide direct services to individuals. So whilst we may come into contact with individuals, for example, during exposure monitoring, we're not typically having sort of one-to-one consultations in the way a doctor or a clinical member of staff might do, where they have a one-to-one consultation. Saying that, those safeguarding principles do apply, as you'll learn during this webinar, and really in two scenarios. So they may apply when any registrants or any practitioners are having to work alone, and there may be factors which need to be considered, or they may arise in relation to other adults which you encounter in the workplace environment. And both Dave and Sarah will be providing examples of where safeguarding practices have needed to be applied. The skills and processes which you'll hear about and then hopefully read about afterwards in the Code of Ethics can be applied to both work and personal scenarios. And I think it's relevant here to note that no other occupational health profession has yet put in place safeguarding practices. So I'm very proud in the fact that BOHS is leading the way in this aspect. So when preparing for this webinar, I was just thinking of some of the places where I've seen examples of safeguarding. You know, we're all out and about, and sometimes you'll just see signs up about guidance for safeguarding. And a couple here is Age UK have safeguarding practices for older people. There's a couple there primarily aimed at safeguarding for children. And the final one there is one I'm personally involved with. So as well as all my BOHS activities, I'm also a technical official for British Triathlon. And earlier this year, all technical officials were required to attend an online safeguarding training session. Because when you are officiating a triathlon, a lot of those events can be children events. So then you can have a lot of children, adults of different ages. So that was probably earlier this year, the first time I'd sort of actually had training as such in safeguarding. So where we are with the adult safeguarding and the faculty code of ethics. So the clue here is sort of in the title. This is adult safeguarding. And an adult at risk is any person who is aged 18 or over and at risk of abuse, harm, or neglect because of their needs for care or support, and who are unable to safeguard themselves. Often, but not always, this is used in the context of someone who lacks mental capacity who has additional social care needs. It is acknowledged that as part of our practice, we may come into contact with other vulnerable individuals, such as children. But for the purposes of this guidance, we took the assumption that we would all be vigilant for such situations with children, and then be following any specific safeguarding duties or policies which were applicable to the setting we were coming across those children. If there are rare circumstances where you do have a concern about safeguarding of other vulnerable people, which isn't covered by these practices, then really we direct you either the duty holder or the person in charge of that scenario, or if you need to, just contact BOHS head office and they'll try to signpost you in the right direction. So adult safeguarding practices means working to protect the rights of workers to live in safety, free from abuse, harm, and neglect, and have their rights and choices respected. If you think of the principles under which we all operate, occupational hygiene can actually be thought of as a safeguarding profession. We look after, or is our duty to protect workers from harm. So in reality, a lot of us have probably been following safeguarding practices and principles as second nature, but not really appreciating what we were doing. It's that sort of putting the label on it. Oh, what we're actually doing when we're looking at how we make sure a worker is protected from harm is indirectly applying some safeguarding principles. We also need to be aware of some sort of situational capacity issues. And what do I mean by that? Well, this might be circumstances such as the adult being under constraint or subject to coercion or undue influence, so they're not able to make their own decisions. And if you think about it, if you're in a workplace looking at the control measures which are needed, if that person, for whatever reason, is being told not to use the control measures, because maybe it slows them down or something like that, then that's something which we need to be aware of, and that would sort of come under the umbrella of safeguarding, because that person isn't actually having the right to use the control measures to enable them to be free of harm. So I'm going to hand you over now to Dave, who will take you through a little bit more of the detail of the safeguarding practices, which is in the Code of Ethics, and also then some examples for which he's encountered as part of his occupational hygiene duties. So over to you, Dave.
Okay, I think I'm sharing the screen now, aren't I? Yes.
You are, yes.
Just going into, I think I'm just getting into presentation mode. There we go. Okay, is that all? That's all. That should be in full screen now. Yes.
No, you haven't got any speaker notes, but if you did, I think you just need to swap. So if you do display settings and swap to the your other, yeah, swap present. Yeah.
Is that it? There we are. How's that?
That's it.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Dave Rogers, and I'm just going to go through the some of the basics of what's in Appendix A of the Code of Ethics with regards to safeguarding and the principles thereof, and then a few examples of where I've come across potential safeguarding aspects in recent times. As you'll see in the Appendix A, there are 6 principles of safeguarding that are key to our needs. One of the most important principles of safeguarding is it is everybody's responsibility, and that means that everybody in the profession and the organisation must do everything they can to ensure that adults at risk are protected from abuse, harm and neglect to the best of our ability. There are 6 principles that underpin adults safeguarding, and they apply to all sectors and settings. And these principles inform the ways in which professionals engage with people at risk of abuse, harm or neglect. So what are these 6? They are, first of all, it's empowerment. It's about all information and training should be personalised, and it's presumed that the individual in the workplace have informed decisions and informed consent to carry out what activities. The second one is prevention, and this is that it's better to take action before harm can occur. That we act in a proportional manner, proportionality, that is, we make no more interference with personal rights and liberty than are actually needed to achieve the goal of workplace health protection. Provide protection through support and representation for those who are in greatest need. Form a partnership as we need to with others to help us carry out safeguarding of adults at risk, and accountability, that we need to be accountable for our actions that we take and also the ones that we don't take. In Appendix A, each of these principles are further expanded. For example, the empowerment aspect, I won't read all of this, but it clearly is associated with making sure that the individuals that we come across fully understand the nature of the health risks that they're subjected to, the implications of the failure or neglect of controls, and also in terms of the workforce being able to comprehend just what actually is required to make an informed decision. So you can see we've got issues there with every contact that we may come across in a workplace with an individual, and just making sure that they understand and they comprehend the need for understand the nature of their risks in the workplace, what happens if they use or don't use the controls, and that they have subsequently made an informed decision in this regard. With prevention, this is how it's critical to enable the prevention, is to ensure that the workers are who are adults at risk in this sense of safeguarding are fully aware of the steps that can be taken to prevent them from being put at risk. Proportionality is about acting in an appropriate and proportionate risk for the individuals. For example, if we require people to wear close-fitting respirators, respiratory protective equipment, this could be there could be an ethical risk in relation to restricting someone for long periods of time, and if it's a adult at risk, that adult may choose not to continue wearing the respiratory protection because of the influence of their vulnerability in that particular workplace. Similarly, administrative controls may be more practical for a business, but they impose restrictions on certain individuals potentially, which could disproportionately increase the risk for those persons. You can think about the requirement for hearing protection, perhaps, with people who already have hearing aids or other requirements, and the way you administer a control measure to the way you have a control measure to look at those sorts of activities will influence how you deal with the various individuals in that workplace. Protection is that we need to ensure that if we come across people who are potentially at risk and are vulnerable, then we provide appropriate support and representation for them to the relevant parties. And finally, last slide on from the principles section is the partnership aspect, where we may or may not recognise a particular safeguarding issue in a workplace, but where we do, and we feel that there may be an ongoing issue, we need to be signposted to appropriate other professionals in the workplace, and also consider and work with them to deal with the safeguarding issues. And the management of confidential information is also important in relation to adults at risk in that workplace and how we deal with that. And finally, we need to be accountable for the actions that we take and don't take, and ensure that the adults at risk know that what we are or are not doing for or with them in a particular situation. There are several types of safeguarding risks. These are enunciated in the Appendix A of the Code of Ethics. Some of these will be reasonably familiar, I think, with most people: physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, financial and material abuse, where you may be relying on the individual to work with particular pieces of equipment or within a financial structure which is actually causing them abuse because they can't afford perhaps to get to work at a particular time because they have to come by bus rather than driving, and it's longer by the bus, for example. And neglect and acts of omissions, things that adults, the vulnerable person, may be being ignored or neglected in the workplace for various reasons. They may be self-neglecting or self-harming or other indicators of abuse. They may be under domestic abuse in their own personal circumstances. You can't always tell these things when you go to a workplace. And discriminatory abuse or organisational abuse, which is where the organisation is requiring unreasonable things of the particular individual. And there may be even modern slavery aspects within the workplace as well, which are also not always obvious, and maybe it's less likely in some situations than others. So in recent times, what have I seen? Well, I've come across these sorts of situations. We do have an aging workforce in the workplace, and you may come across some of these examples of people who may be in advanced, early or advanced stages of such things like dementia and Alzheimer's. When you come across these sorts of people, and they may be eager to just say yes, but they may not actually provide you with informed consent. Because they may not understand what you're asking them. So that's an example of consent. You may think you may have the consent to do something, but it may not have been informed consent. People who are on the spectrum, shall we say, or may have degrees of Asperger's or autism, and their method of understanding things are different from perhaps our own, and you need to be able to explain to them. These can be challenges in training, in instruction, and in the way you the way you require them to implement control measures. Persons with special needs, or persons under mental stress, for example. Persons under mental stress may not always be easily recognized, and they may change from time to time. I've seen this in several workplaces where you go along and have a conversation with an individual which is entirely engaged and clear and so forth, and then the next time the person may be showing erratic behavior, may not be relating with their colleagues or yourself in the way that they have done in the past. So that's a potential example of people who may be showing a changed vulnerability. I've been in several workplaces where English is not the first language, and hence all of the ways that you need to get informed consent and for what we do for certain things need to have a different method of communication. In that case, I've seen common Eastern European common languages in workplaces. The documentation is actually in English and another Eastern European language, just to improve that the communication aspects and the training aspects. And also that you may come across workplace groups with different working norms and patterns and expectations, and so I mean, they work the way they work as a team and the way they interact with a team in terms of collaborative or hierarchical arrangements can exist. I've also come across people who can't read or write, and the different communication methods required for these type of people are needed to get the understanding of risk and control measures and informed consent across. Most recently, I saw that in a crane driver and the person on the ground directing the crane, and they had to come up with be trained in a different way to ensure that verbal and visual communication were their main communication methods rather than reading and writing based ones. Yeah, I mean, examples of organizational pressures and practices which can potentially take advantage of the workforce and to make them more vulnerable in the workplace. Different work shift patterns, production targets, welfare conditions, organisation requiring working for a certain time, lack of flexibility, pay pressure, peer pressure, all of those things you see quite often in workplaces, which could exacerbate existing vulnerabilities for people within that workplace. Peripatetic workforce on major projects. Yes, I've worked on several major infrastructure and construction projects in the UK, and a lot of the workforce actually travel and move around. So you can have several thousand people working on these projects, but they are away from home continuously during the week. They may even have a caravan or a shared caravan or shared accommodation during the weekend as well, away from their main bases just to get the work done. And that's I know of several cases on those projects where there's been higher suicide rates and also a lot of increased dissatisfaction, shall we say, or with the work methodologies and the compliance with wearing PPE, and just generally people are under higher mental stress, which you may not know about. They're also under higher physical stress or physical abuse, even because they're not eating properly, they're having trouble sleeping, and it becomes a big issue. When you go to a workplace, you meet people, and that's what we do. But you may not actually know that they have particular physical impairments, such as tinnitus or noise-induced hearing loss, or medical conditions, diabetes, epilepsy, or drug-controlled conditions, illnesses. Or they may be recovering from major illnesses, such as cancer or pacemaker wearers. Or they may have psychiatric conditions, which are totally not recognizable until something goes. And several examples of that you see quite, and you just have to the persons with we don't recognize these people immediately necessarily, and we have to be aware that they could be present in our workplaces. And also people going through the transgender processes, where the example I've got in my head is a place that I've been going for several years now, and that individual has changed over that period of time. But the way you deal with that person when you speak to that person, it should be no different all the way through that process. Similarly, how that person relates to the rest of the workforce may or may not have changed. In this particular case, they seem to have been well accommodated during that process. So we can come across these potential vulnerable individuals in the workplaces, and we need to provide some approach to safeguard them from risk. So what should an occupational hygienist be able to do? Well, first of all, stand back a bit and just contextualize the situation and how the person is acting and dealing with that the situation at a particular time that as you come across them. Recognize that the individual may be in a more vulnerable situation and require additional time as you interact with them, and respond appropriately to the individual if you could think they may be vulnerable. So to do this, what we should do is we should give people the time and space to think and to respond. Don't rush them. Listen rather than lecturing or assume, make assumptions. Respecting of the person, their personal space, the cultural norms associated with that, their ethnicity, their religion, and all those sorts of aspects. If we're putting monitoring equipment on people, for example, explain the process clearly, ask their permission, and involve the person with the putting on and taking off their monitoring equipment rather than going straight up and just putting it on them. And always ask permission of the individual before taking photographs of themselves. And if possible, before you get to a workplace, actually interact with the management beforehand to identify if there is any known potential vulnerability aspects or issues of the workplace that you need to be aware of before you actually go there, so that you are pre-warned and ready for the situations. So where could we find safeguarding issues as an occupational hygienist? Well, examples, some of these are obvious. I mean, healthcare settings, the care homes, educational sectors. You go to these sectors and the people in the staff in these sectors are well trained in safeguarding. They've had a lot of training in general in most cases. But then you have places like prisons, and both the staff and the inmates have significant vulnerabilities through physical and mental stress in particular, but other aspects as well. Similarly with police, social care, military, people are coming up against physical and mental stresses on a regular basis in these type of sectors, and they should have safeguarding processes well embedded in their training and organisation. But then we come to industry, and that's all industry, all offices, all public service areas, and in actual fact, I think all personnel in these situations could be vulnerable persons at one time or another. And so the answer is to where could safeguarding issues be encountered? Probably just about all workplaces. We've been thinking about adult safeguarding and the fact that we've been standing in front of an individual in a workplace and thinking, are you vulnerable or not? But what about ourselves, the occupational hygienists? Are we potentially requiring safeguarding? Are we potentially vulnerable persons? Could we require safeguarding actions associated with with ourselves? And could we be vulnerable? I think the answer to that, those last two bullets, are probably we're as human as the people that we go to see in the workforce. Why wouldn't we be vulnerable? Why wouldn't we need safeguarding and potentially in certain circumstances? With that in mind, I'm going to pass over to Sarah now with an example, hopefully, of something to do along those lines. So thank you.
Sarah, you need to come off mute.
Hangover from COVID. You're on mute. That's not very often I get muted, actually. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah. Thank you, Dave and Sarah, for inviting me in this sort of joint webinar on safeguarding. I'm going to talk about a very specific area of the work that we do on the asbestos technical side, really relating to female analysts and some of the issues that we've had with working on site. So my name is Sarah Mason. I'm a fellow of the Faculty of Asbestos Assessment and Management. As Sarah's already said, I'm on the FAM committee. I'm also the chair of the FAM conference, and we've just had our conference this week, which was the 7th conference we've had since forming in 2017. That was it. And yeah, we're working to improve standards, and that's really what we're all about. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk you through a journey that we've been on through setting up a working group. So back in FAM 2021, still in COVID, we had an online conference, and many of you will know Colette Willoughby from BOHS days, and she gave a presentation on her experience as a site analyst. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with what the role of the analyst is, I'll talk that through in the next slide, but she gave a revelation about the dreadful experience she'd had. And from that, we decided that something really needed to be done about safeguarding our workers, employees, friends and colleagues about working on site. So we formed a working group, and we've called it the Female Analyst Working Group, and we set up in 2021. in December. So we've been going for nearly 4 years. In that, we brought together a lot of experience. We've all been female analysts on site ourselves, so we're very aware of what happens on site and what shouldn't happen on site, and what we've quite frankly put up with on site until we've decided to make this stand, really. So we brought a wide representation across consultancy. Obviously, we're on the front line, just like yourselves as occupational hygienists, brought together clients, obviously members from FAM and BOHS, and also importantly other stakeholders like the HSE and UCAS. And we meet regularly to look at what we can do as a sort of industry leaders. So we set about a few tasks. The initial one was setting up a helpline. Now, it seems daft, doesn't it? You know, we should already know what's going on in the workplace, in particular in our very niche workplace. But we decided it would be helpful to really have a confidential helpline, one that analysts, male or female, could contact and share any concerns they've had in the past, and some of the stories that came through that I won't share, but they were really harrowing. And we were just touching the tip of an iceberg. So we want to look at the scale and range of abuse. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But my main issue is looking at some of the practical things that we've managed to achieve. The other task was looking at preparedness to decontaminate. Now, a lot of occupational hygienists on this call probably don't need to decontaminate on a daily basis, like our site analysts would have to do. So why is it important? And again, I'll go through that because it is an important issue. So our ultimate game really was looking at that decontamination process and producing some safety guidance for analysts to be able to work to when they do this 4-stage clearance certification following asbestos removal. And ultimately, we want to see policy change. So when we set about looking at the scale and range of abuse, we set up an email through social media. So we set it up through the Female Analyst Working Group. We had these 2 confidential emails, and yeah, we had some pretty harrowing stuff. This was from rape on site. This was pregnancy, people not talking about it. It was horrific, quite frankly, and has no really, place in our modern working environment. And it was truly harrowing. And we're really determined as a group to stamp this out and make people aware of it. And this is why I'm here today. I've spent quite a lot of this year going to groups, highlighting this. Colette has as well, and others in our group, because we're really passionate about this. We think the numbers of site analysts, and these are analysts that are lone working on site, depending on your definition of lone working, as a professional, they're the only professional on site with that role. So we determine it as sort of a lone working setting. The range of abuse, as I say, could be verbal, could be harassment, could be interrupting and intimidating their work, because we've got a very particular sort of inspection role, statutory role on site, and it can be very unsettling when you're the lone worker on site, particularly if you're female. It can be very intimidating. So we set this confidential email up. If anyone has any concerns after this call, please get in touch with me or follow one of these email addresses, and please share any experiences that you might have. It'll be completely confidential. So understanding the issue. So what is the issue? Well, those of you that don't know, don't really have a lot of experience of what we do on site, we're asbestos site analysts. So we have an inspection role given to us by the HSE through UCAS, which is the sole accreditation service. We have this statutory role. So when the duty holder hands over an area where asbestos is going to be removed to the licensed asbestos removal contractor, at the end of that process, before handing it back to the duty holder, we are required as inspectors, as site analysts, to go and conduct a full stage clearance process. It's challenging. And it's a responsible role, one that we're highly trained for. Under our accreditation, we have a set criteria that we have to work to. It can be a hostile environment. There's time pressure, there's financial pressure, which has been alluded to through safeguarding principles that Dave outlined, which can lead to abuse and harassment, which is not uncommon. And of course, this is experienced by male and female counterparts, but unfortunately not easy for a female to admit this, but we can be more vulnerable on site. And you can see this little insight I've put at the bottom here, this infographic showing the fact that we have to get undressed on site and have a shower to decontaminate. And those units are not fit for purpose. They're not safe. We cannot lock them and be completely safe inside. Now, this has been going on for far too long, and we've accepted it as an industry, but we're determined to make that change. So why does this happen? Well, I've already alluded to them and us, time constraint, undressing and showering makes us vulnerable. We don't know the history of some of the workers on site. Anecdotally, they may not be the most desirable people you'd want to work with. Some of them are very good and very professional, but we know there are some elements that we wouldn't normally wish to work with, which does make us vulnerable. There's no DBS requirement within our industry. We have no control over safety in that hygiene unit. And also there's a real lack of training of soft skills, of those soft skills. We do the technical skills, right, through P modules, etc. But what about the soft skills? How to de-escalate a situation that might lead and escalate to something really undesirable. We need to do more of those soft skill training. There's also a lack of professional standing. Now, we don't, at this point of time, we don't actually know how many 4-stage clearance analysts we have in the UK. We think there's roughly a few hundred, and we think anecdotally that only 1 in 10 are women, because it's such an awful site condition for females to work in. Well, apart from the welfare facility situation, which is commonly extremely poor. So we looked at the preparedness to decontaminate. The requirement in our guidance, which is HSG 248, says there is some flexibility there. Do we need to decontaminate every time? In other words, strip off, go through that shower and then dress again. We looked at, are there ways that we can give more practical guidance to analysts? And we looked at 4-stage clearance, the air test, stage 3, where we do active dust disturbance to produce the results which enables the enclosure to come down through the stage 4 process. And we looked at a data range of 32,000 different clearances results, and we found that just a small proportion of them fail. Now, this is not saying whether it's safe or not, but the criteria, as you know, clearance indicator, statutory clearance indicator is less than 0.01 fibres per mil. So there's a very small 8.5% do fail that, and within a small margin. Now, that's not saying whether it's safe or not, but is there a need for us to decontaminate every time? So it's giving autonomy, giving analysts an option not to have to do that if they feel it's not safe for them to do so on site. So we looked at that. Then we looked at the DCUs, these hygiene units, decontamination units that we use on site. And they don't comply to CDM. They never have done, but no one's ever really looked at it. The minimum requirements is that capability to be secured from the inside. So when you're using that shower facility, that you have complete control. Well, we don't. Every key code on every single DCU which is used on site has the same code. Everyone knows it. So we don't have that complete safety on site. When we're undressing, we have to shower for 5 minutes. That leaves you very, very vulnerable when you're on site lone working. Seems very obvious, doesn't it? So how can we make these decontamination units safer? Well, we've talked to the manufacturers. There's 3 main ones of DCUs in the UK. SMH are the main ones, and you can see this sort of pull-along trailer system here in the picture. So we talked to them, highlighted the issues to encourage them to look at redesigning. And I'm really pleased to report that they're listening and they're horrified by what we've had to experience on site. And they are looking at retrofitting, looking at new models, and also we all know welfare facilities as well, bolting on a toilet wash system as well. And this will make it safer for analysts on site. And there's a link to Construction News there, where there's an article specifically on, sort of updating, making them safer. So now we have an alert system. So when someone's in there, we can lock it. It has a safety function, obviously, that can be overridden, because if someone hurt themselves, we need to get in there. But when we're using it, we feel we have a safer working environment. So really, just to finish off of what's next, we're determined to keep going. We're determined to improve that relationship between the analyst and the licensed asbestos removal contractor. We have another statutory role on site, which is the license holder, the supervisory license holder. They have complete autonomy on site. They are responsible for our safeguard on site. Some of them don't really understand that, but we're determined to make sure that they understand that they've got to have our safeguarding as well as their own employees and the duty holders' responsibilities as well. We know no one likes conflict and certainly don't like criticism. So we have to work harder on how we can train our staff to better perform on site and get the best out of what their task is. We know that better training, conflict resolution is really important. And also we just need to build that mutual respect so that we can safeguard everyone's health and safety on site. And lastly, we just want to, look at whether we can have a respect charter, which will enable us to just highlight the issues of safeguarding on site and make sure it's safer for everyone, in particular, encouraging our workforce to participate in this very important work. Well, thank you for listening. It's a very whistle-stop tour through what we've been doing, but if anyone wants to get in touch with me, please do. Thank you.
Wow, that was very insightful, Sarah. I'm glad to see some of the changes which are being brought about. I knew there was an issue there. I didn't realise it was to that scale. So, yeah. Lee, do you want to hand over to you again, and we'll do the last two questions? I think the main questions I saw was where was the code of ethics on the website, and hopefully that's been clarified as it's under the governance pages for the faculties. There's a slightly off-topic comment there about if we've got a couple of comments on. I don't know if we want to come back to that if we've got a bit more time. Does anyone have any other questions or experiences they'd like to share specifically about safeguarding and the topics we've covered this afternoon? You can come off mute if you want to say a question.
Yeah, it's Richard Brown. Just an observation on what Dave was saying earlier, and as he was going through how we'd ideally want to deal with people who needed safeguarding, I actually thought that what a lot of what he said was actually about good occupational hygiene. It's about listening to the people. So I'm a consultant, so I'm not employed in a company. I go out, so I visit places and I don't stay there very long. So you have to listen to people. It's something I've learned. But to me, that's listening to people is one of the first steps. But then things like, so he's talking about communicating the hazard. Well, you have to find the way of communicating hazard and risk to a whole range of people, because okay, if it's a chemical hazard, well, I've got a chemical background, so for me that's easy. But if someone hasn't got that knowledge, if they didn't even do O-level chemistry, it's not about them having some safeguard issue. It's about finding the right route to communicate to that individual once you understand how to do so. I understand where he's coming from, because we need to broaden that understanding. But for me, the basic practice of occupational hygiene we should be trying to do that anyway. So yes, we need to raise our game a bit, but it's really what we do. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not some new thing. It's the same but better.
And that sort of comes back, Richard, I think, to my comment that, occupational hygiene by its nature is a safeguarding occupation.
Yes.
So we've sort of been doing it indirectly and not knowing it. But I think what this does is increase that awareness, but also hopefully will make us a little bit more aware of other scenarios we may not necessarily have thought of before. But go along with your comment there.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Sarah, that yes, we have to find the right communication methods, Richard, and I totally agree with you there. But there's also the error of omission as well. If we don't find the correct communication methodology, that person could become more vulnerable and require, fall into the safeguarding aspect. So yeah. I see Jonathan's got his hand up as well.
Yeah, I'm just keen because I know in case we start, we'll come back. We will pick up on your question, Jonathan. But Lee, do you just want to give everyone the other VVOX number? So, because I'm keen to get the two questions answered at the end, and then we can do that. And then Jonathan, as soon as that's come up, we'll come on to you.
Excellent. So yes, if everybody just gets their phones back and ready, and I will share the second presentation. So if I just start that. So there you go. So just on the left hand side there, so you got vvox.app again, and then it's that 9-digit code. I'll just open up the first question. There you go. Yeah, people have got it. People are answering, which is good. Cool. Conscious of time, so I'll just give that another couple of seconds. Yep, I'll call that one there. So I'll just close that one off. And obviously we're hoping for that. There we go. That's probably what we all wanted to see. So that's fantastic. And then there's just one more question. Just a couple of people there, but I'll close that now. There you go. I'm sure that's what we all wanted to see. So I will stop sharing now and pass you back over to Sarah for, I think, Jonathan's question before we finish up.
Yeah, Jonathan, do you want to go?
Sorry, I'll make it really quick. It was just sort of in addition and complementing to what Sarah said, in the asbestos sector, there's so much work on the surveying side happens in the social housing sector. And you get all sorts of situations arising in that where there's safeguarding issues for your employees if you're employing someone and sending them out. You get things which is a VIP list, which is not the nice thing you think it is. It means visit in pairs, which is an indication that there might be an issue that you have to deal with, even to the point where sometimes you get on site and there are situations where you actually have to phone the housing association to say you need to do an intervention here, and there might be people that haven't been visited for a long time, and you would be amazed and horrified about what it comes across. And then also there's a lot of surveys happen of void properties where you get issues which are general health and safety things, but you have all sorts of stuff like needles and various things. So there's quite a few examples in the dirty asbestos sector. So that was all I just wanted to add. Thanks.
All right, that brings us nicely up to 3 o'clock. So thank you, everyone. I know a few people are dropping off, probably got school runs and things now needing to be done. So thank you. If anyone has got questions which we didn't have a chance to cover, if you want to email those in, probably email through to Lee, and he can make sure we address those separately and send out responses. But otherwise, thank you very much for your attention this afternoon. And thank you for my co-presenters, Dave and Sarah. I'm wishing everyone a good weekend.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you.